Okay, this is a video that talks about the HTTP Internet Protocol. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and it is the way to request and deliver web pages. So first I want to talk about the protocol a little. Like I said, it stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And it was first officially released in 1991. And in 1991, before something called CGI existed that we'll talk about in a moment, this is kind of the setup and the process that we have. So on a computer somewhere with a user sitting in front of it, the user is running a web browser piece of software. And somewhere out on the internet, we have a computer that, because it serves web pages, is going to be referred to as the web server. And on that web server, you have one or more web server processes running that are going to handle requests for web pages. So the user in their browser enters a URL and clicks go or hits return. And what that does is it causes something called an HTTP request to be sent to one of the web server processes. The web server process then locates the requested web page, which is an HTML file. It reads that in, and then it generates something called an HTTP response that delivers the web page to the user's browser. And when the browser receives that response, it then images the page, so displays the web page to the user. So that is how the HTTP protocol works, and some of the terminology related to it. Now, CGI is an abbreviation for Common Gateway Interface, and it has been in use since about 1993. And the purpose of CGI is to allow a web server to dynamically create a web page by running scripts. And those scripts can connect to a database or just do whatever you need to do to generate the web page. So with CGI in the picture, we still have the user's computer running a web browser. We still have a web server somewhere out on the internet. And we start the process the same as before, which is the user types in a URL. And that generates an HTTP request to the web server. Now, since we're using CGI, instead of looking up a static HTML file, it's actually going to execute the CGI program on the computer. And the CGI program can be written in any language that can generate the HTTP response, which we'll look at here in a little bit. In the beginning, Perl was very popular for doing that. It's still very popular. But Python, C# if you're on a Windows server, any language that can generate a valid response is acceptable. So the web server process executes the CGI program, which generates the HTTP response that is sent back to the user's browser. And then, like before, the browser takes that HTTP response and generates a web page from it. So what we're going to do now is delve a little deeper into the HTTP request and response. So basically, as we saw in the picture, the HTTP request is something that a browser sends to a web server. And in its simplest form, we have something like this: get/help/index.html space HTTP/1.1. So the various pieces of this request are first, we have the method, which is going to be either get or post. So in this case, it's obviously a get. The second piece of information we have is referred to the path. So this is telling the web server process exactly where the file is located on the server the process is running on. And then the last piece of information is the protocol, which of course we're talking about HTTP, / the version number. So this is using version 1.1 of the HTTP protocol. That's what that's telling the web server. So a full request can have lots of other information. You can have an email address of the person requesting it. You can tell what kind of things you'll accept. So, I'll accept HTML, but I'll also accept any kind of text. The user agent is how the browser is identifying itself. So in this example, it's Mozilla version 1.0. If you were referred to this website by another website, that's what the referrer is. Tells what URL you were at that referred you to the website or the web page that you're trying to look up. You can actually authenticate a user using simple username and password. You can have charge to. So if you're doing something that's doing accounting, you can say charge to this project or charge to this person. And then you can specify, I want it if modified since a particular date. So that's just some examples of some things that can be in a larger full HTTP request. Now, once we do that, we get a response back from the browser. And this is showing you a simple response. And there are, in general, a couple of types. First, we have something called the HTTP header, which, much like the request, has these kind of keyword value pairs. We have to have a single blank line, or really I should say at least one blank line. And then after that blank line, we have what's referred to as the HTTP body. So the HTTP header is giving us information about the web page that was returned, whether it was successful or not, what type of information we sent back, etc. And then the HTTP body is the HTML code that is supposed to be imaged by the browser. So if we go in and look at these a little closer, the first one is the protocol / version like we had before, and a status code. Anything in the 200s is success. And then the reason is kind of expanding upon that status code. So most of the time you're hoping to get a 200 OK, which means I was able to look up the web page and return it to you. And then next we have what we were sending back, which is the content type. So I'm sending you text, ASCII text. More specifically, that text is HTML code. So this is kind of a bare minimum response header that is being sent back. Then we have the actual HTML code that the browser takes and images. So that was a real brief discussion of the basics of the HTTP protocol.